When he was kicked out of the system at 18 with nothing but a key and a cryptic letter, he bought a derelict Quonset hut for $12. But what he built there wasn't just a home. It was a testament to a love he never knew he had, and it would save more than just his own life. If you've ever felt lost and had to build your own way home, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about what it means to find your power when the world has counted you out. The door to the Northgate Youth Transition Center closed behind me with a sound that was both a click and a sigh. It was a sound I'd been waiting to hear for 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days. A sound that meant freedom. Ms. Albright, my case manager for the final 2 years, stood on the other side of the reinforced glass, her expression a careful mixture of professional concern and personal fatigue. She held up a manila envelope, tapping it against the pane. I'd already signed for it. It was mine. Everything that was mine in the world was in that envelope, and in the thin nylon duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The bag held 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a worn paperback I'd read a dozen times. The envelope felt heavier. I stood on the concrete steps, not moving. The air was cold for May, sharp with the smell of damp asphalt and car exhaust. It felt thin in my lungs, so different from the recycled, filtered air inside. For years, every minute of my day had been scheduled, every meal accounted for, every interaction monitored. Now, the world was a vast, silent, empty spreadsheet, and I didn't know the formulas. I was 18, I was free, and I was terrified. The door had locked automatically. There was no going back. I forced my feet to move, one after the other, down the steps and onto the cracked sidewalk. I didn't look back. Looking back was a luxury for people who had something good to look back at. My past was a series of closed doors, beige hallways, and faces that tried to look kind, but were mostly just tired. My parents were a faded photograph, a story that ended too soon in a pile of twisted metal on a slick highway. After that, the system, a succession of foster homes that never quite fit, ending here at Northgate, the last stop before you were officially no one's problem anymore. I walked the 4 blocks to the bus station, the duffel bag bumping against my hip. The city felt loud, aggressive. People hurried past, their faces set, their destinations certain. I was a ghost drifting through their world. The bus station was a cavern of grimy tile and echoing announcements, smelling of diesel fumes and stale coffee. I found a hard plastic bench in a corner, as far from everyone else as I could get, and placed the envelope on my knees. My hands were shaking slightly. Inside was my official release paperwork, my new Social Security card, my birth certificate, and $357 in cash. The sum total of my state-provided savings, earned from scrubbing floors and washing dishes at a rate that was technically legal, but felt like a joke. Beneath the cash was another, smaller envelope, yellowed with age. My name, Leo, was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar hand. This was the thing Ms. Albright had been so solemn about. "This came for you years ago," she'd said, her voice low. "From your maternal grandmother. We were instructed to hold it until your 18th birthday. I never knew my grandmother. After the accident, I was told she was too ill, too old, too something to take me in. Another closed door. I'd learned not to ask about her. It was easier that way. My fingers fumbled with the brittle flap. Inside was a single, folded sheet of paper and a heavy, old-fashioned iron key. The key was ornate, rusted in the grooves, the kind of thing you'd see in a movie about castles. It felt impossibly ancient. I unfolded the paper. The same spidery script, faded but clear. The letter wasn't long. It read, "My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are a man. I am sorry for so many things. I am sorry I could not be there to watch you grow. I was not strong enough in body, but my love for you was the strongest thing I ever knew. I have left you what little I have. It is not money. It is a place, a piece of land under a big sky. It is not much, but it is yours. The deed is with the county clerk in Prairie Ridge. They have been paid. I have also left you a small inheritance of wind and iron. Find it. The key is for the chest. Go to the place where the sun sets last. Your true north is waiting. Be strong, my boy. Your grandmother, Ilara." Inheritance of wind and iron. True north. It sounded like poetry or a riddle. I looked at the cash in my other hand. $357. I could get a room at a cheap motel for a week, maybe 2. I could try to find a job, a foothold in this city that didn't want me. That was the sensible path, the Northgate path. Or I could follow a ghost's whisper to a place called Prairie Ridge. I could take a chance on a dead woman's riddle and an old iron key. I looked at the key again, its cold weight a solid thing in my palm. It was the only thing I'd ever held that connected me to my family, to a life before the system. It was a piece of a story that was mine. The sensible path felt like a longer, slower version of the cage I had just left. The riddle felt like a chance to breathe. I stood up, walked to the ticket counter, and looked at the big board of destinations. Prairie Ridge wasn't on it. Of course not. I asked the woman behind the glass. She frowned, typing into her computer. "Prairie Ridge? No bus goes there," she said, not looking up. "Closest you'll get is a town called Harmony. It's a full day's ride. From there, you're on your own." "One ticket to Harmony," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I pushed a handful of dollars under the glass. It was a choice, my first real choice. I didn't know if it was the right one, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The ticket to Harmony cost nearly 1/3 of my money. I watched the numbers on the screen deplete my worldly wealth with an unnerving finality. The ticket agent, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, pushed the flimsy paper towards me without a word. It felt like a verdict. I had a 4-hour wait. I spent it on the same hard bench, guarding my duffel bag and the envelope. I bought a bottle of water and a stale protein bar from a vending machine, a purchase that felt extravagant. The bus station was a river of humanity flowing around me. Families with too much luggage, soldiers in uniform, students with backpacks, people who looked as lost as I felt. I was invisible, just another piece of driftwood in the current. I reread my grandmother's letter until the creases were soft as cloth. A small inheritance of wind and iron. What could that possibly mean? The land I could understand, but the rest of it was a puzzle. The key was heavy in my pocket, a constant solid reminder of this absurd quest. The sensible part of my brain, the part that had been trained by years of institutional living, screamed at me. It told me I was a fool, that I was chasing a fantasy. Grandmothers in stories leave cottages with rose gardens or apartments in the city. They don't leave riddles about wind and a patch of dirt in a place no bus will go to. The money would run out. The hope would curdle into despair. I would end up on the streets, another statistic Ms. Albright could add to her files. But another, quieter voice whispered back. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years. It sounded a little like the boy in the faded photograph, the one before the accident. It told me that the sensible path was just a different kind of trap. A life of quiet desperation, of scraping by, of always being on the outside looking in. This path, my grandmother's path, was a leap into the unknown. It might lead to nothing. It might lead to disaster. But it was a direction. It was a purpose, however flimsy. It was a story that wasn't finished yet. When they finally called my bus, the announcement crackled through the speakers, garbled and indistinct, but I heard the word harmony as clearly as a bell. I joined the line, shuffling forward with the other passengers. The driver, a big man with a graying beard, took my ticket and grunted. He glanced at my duffel bag, then at my face. It was a look I knew well, the look that sized you up and filed you away under trouble or runaway. I stared back, my face a blank mask I had perfected over years. Let him think what he wanted. I found a seat by a window, halfway down the bus. The engine rumbled to life, a deep vibration that resonated in my bones. The bus pulled away from the station, its air brakes hissing like a tired beast. I watched the city blur past the greasy window. Skyscrapers gave way to office parks, then to strip malls, then to endless suburbs with identical houses and manicured lawns. It was a world I had only ever seen from a distance, a life that felt as alien as a foreign country. I leaned my head against the cool glass. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows. My reflection was a pale, hollow-eyed stranger superimposed over the passing landscape. 18 years old, and I had no idea who I was. All I had was a name, a key, and a dead woman's promise. The bus droned on into the night. The suburbs melted away, replaced by dark fields and scattered lights from lonely farmhouses. The other passengers slept, their heads lolling against the seats. I stayed awake, watching the darkness. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But something else was stirring too, a fragile, unfamiliar feeling. It wasn't quite hope, it was more like curiosity. For the first time, I didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow. And for the first time, that felt less like a threat and more like a possibility. I was on my way to the place where the sun sets last. I was on my way to an inheritance of wind. The journey was a long, hypnotic blur. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt became the soundtrack to my thoughts. I drifted in and out of a light, uneasy sleep, my dreams a jumble of beige hallways and wide-open, windy plains. Each time I woke, the landscape outside the window had changed. The dense forests of the east thinned out, the hills flattened, and the sky seemed to grow larger, more dominant. The world was opening up. By the second morning, we were in a different country. The land was vast and empty, a tapestry of brown and gold under a pale blue sky. The occasional town was a small cluster of buildings huddled together as if for warmth, surrounded by an ocean of land. The bus was mostly empty now. A few passengers got off at each stop, replaced by no one. I was the last one left, a solitary figure in a long metal tube hurtling through the emptiness. The bus driver kept glancing at me in his rearview mirror. I could feel his curiosity, his pity. Finally he spoke, his voice raspy through the intercom. "Harmony, next stop. End of the line, son." The bus slowed, turning off the main highway onto a cracked two-lane road. The town of Harmony wasn't much. A single main street with a few storefronts, a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a squat brick building with a sign that read, "County Clerk." It looked like a movie set for a film about the end of the world. The bus hissed to a stop in front of the diner. The driver turned in his seat. "This is it," he said. "You sure this is where you want to be?" I nodded, gathering my duffel bag. "Thank you," I said. He just shook his head slowly. "There's a bus back east tomorrow morning at 6. Only one. Don't miss it if you change your mind." It wasn't a threat, just a piece of weary advice. I stepped off the bus and into the wind. It was the first thing I noticed, the wind. It wasn't like city wind, which gusted and swirled around buildings. This was a solid, steady force, a constant pressure that pushed against me. It smelled of dust and distance and something wild. The bus pulled away, leaving me alone on the sidewalk. The silence it left behind was profound. There were no sirens, no traffic, no hum of a million lives being lived all at once. Just the wind whistling around the corners of the buildings. I felt smaller, more exposed than I ever had in the city. I crossed the street to the county clerk's office. A bell chimed as I opened the door. The air inside was warm and smelled of old paper and furniture polish. A woman with a tower of white hair looked up from her desk, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was surprisingly gentle. "I'm here about a piece of property," I said, my own voice sounding rough. "Under the name Elara Vance." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Elara, my goodness, I haven't heard that name in years." She got up and walked to a wall of filing cabinets. She was a dear woman, kept to herself mostly, but she had a fire in her. She pulled open a drawer and began flipping through files. She set this all up a long time ago, paid the property taxes a decade in advance, said it was for her grandson. She looked at me over her glasses. "That'd be you, I suppose." I just nodded, my throat tight. "Here we are." She pulled out a thick file and laid it on the counter. She handed me a map, a simple hand-drawn thing on a piece of yellowed paper. "It's about 5 miles north of town. Just follow this road. Can't miss it. It's the last plot before you hit the old government lands." She pointed to a spot on the map marked with a small X. "The land itself isn't much, the soil's poor, and the wind, well, you've met the wind." She smiled a little. "Is there a building on it? A house?" I asked. Her smile faded. "A house? No, dear, nothing like that. There's an old Quonset hut. Was used for storage by the army back in the 40s. Elara bought the land with it already on there. I don't think anyone's been inside it for 50 years. A Quonset hut, a semicircular metal shed. That was my inheritance. The flicker of hope in my chest dimmed. "There's one more thing," the clerk said, pulling a folded, official-looking document from the file. "This is a tax delinquency notice for the structure itself. The land is paid for, but the hut is considered a separate asset. The back taxes are $12.37. She looked at me apologetically. "If you pay it, the hut is legally yours. If not, the county will likely tear it down by the end of the summer." $12. The absurd specificity of it was almost funny. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my dwindling roll of cash. I counted out $13 and pushed it across the counter. "Keep the change," I said. It felt like a stupid, grand gesture. She stamped the paper with a heavy, satisfying thud and handed it to me. "Well then, welcome to Prairie Ridge, Mr. Vance. I wish you luck." I walked out of her office, the stamped paper and the map in my hand. 5 miles. I looked up the empty road leading out of town. The wind pushed at my back, as if urging me forward. I adjusted the strap of my duffel bag on my shoulder and started walking. The walk was longer than I expected. The 5 miles stretched out under the vast, empty sky. The road was a straight, black ribbon cutting through a landscape of pale, dry grass that rippled in the constant wind. There were no trees, no hills, just the endless plain and the sky. My city legs, used to flat sidewalks and short distances, began to ache. The sun was bright, but gave little warmth. The wind was the real master of this place. It was a physical presence, a constant low roar in my ears. After an hour of walking, I saw it, a glint of metal on the horizon. As I got closer, the shape resolved itself. A long, curved roof of corrugated iron hunkered down against the earth. The Quonset hut. It was bigger than I'd imagined, but also more derelict. Rust bloomed in great orange patches across its surface. Several panels were dented, as if something huge had punched them. It looked less like a building and more like the carcass of some great metal beast that had died out here alone. The land around it was just as bleak. Weeds and tough, wiry grass grew in clumps. A few rusted fence posts leaned at drunken angles. This was it. This was my inheritance. A wave of despair washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. The clerk was right. It wasn't much. It was nothing. I had traded all my money and all my hope for a rusty shed in the middle of nowhere. The bus back to the city, back to the known world, seemed like a lifeline. I could still make it. I could turn around right now, walk back to Harmony, and wait for the morning bus. Forget the riddle. Forget the key. Survive. But I had walked 5 miles, and my grandmother's words echoed in my head. I have left you what little I have. It is yours. I walked the last 100 yards, my feet dragging. I circled the hut. It was about 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. There was a large sliding door on the front, padlocked and rusted shut. On the side was a smaller, standard-sized door. I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It looked ancient, but the lock on the side door looked just as old. I pushed the key into the lock. It scraped, resisted. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't work. It was all a mistake, a cruel joke. I put my shoulder into the door, turned the key with all my strength. There was a loud, grating crack as decades of rust and disuse gave way. The lock turned. The door swung inward with a groan, opening into darkness. A gust of stale, musty air rushed out, the smell of time itself. I hesitated at the threshold, peering into the gloom. The inside was a vast, cavernous space. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the open door. The air was cold, still. My eyes slowly adjusted. The space was mostly empty. The curved metal walls soared overhead. The floor was cracked concrete. In the center of the vast space, covered in a thick gray blanket of dust, was a single object, a large, iron-banded footlocker, the chest from the letter. My heart started to beat faster. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I walked to the chest and knelt down. It was heavy, solid, bolted to the concrete floor. On the front was a heavy-duty hasp, but no lock. It wasn't for a key. It was for something else. I ran my hand over the dusty lid. This was it, the inheritance of iron. I looked around the hut again. My eyes were more accustomed to the dim light now. I saw shapes against the far wall, shrouded in tarps. I walked over and pulled one of the tarps away. A cloud of dust billowed up, making me cough. Beneath it was a stack of what looked like long, curved blades, made of some kind of composite material, and boxes of heavy-duty wiring, and gears, and a large cylindrical metal housing. It wasn't just random junk. These were components. They were parts of a machine. Wind and iron. The words clicked into place. The blades for the wind. The chest of iron. I went back to the chest. I examined the hasp again. It wasn't a lock for a key, but a latch that required a tool. I searched the hut, my excitement growing. Tucked away in a corner, I found a small, rusty toolbox. Inside was a single, heavy wrench. It fit the bolt on the hasp perfectly. With a groan of protesting metal, the bolt turned. The latch lifted. I took a deep breath and pulled open the heavy lid of the chest. It wasn't filled with gold or heirlooms. It was filled with paper. Stacks and stacks of letters, bundled with twine. On top of the first bundle was a single, thick envelope. On it, in my grandmother's spidery script, were the words, "Read me first." My hands were trembling as I picked it up. This was the real inheritance. Not the land, not the hut, not the machine parts. It was this, a story, her story, and mine. I sat on the dusty floor of the Quonset hut, the single beam of light from the door illuminating the envelope in my hands. The world outside, the wind, the endless sky, it all faded away. There was only this place, this moment. I broke the wax seal, which crumbled into red dust under my thumb. The letter inside was many pages long, the paper thin and fragile. The ink was slightly faded, but the handwriting was firm, determined. "My dearest Leo," it began, just like the first one. "I hope this letter finds you well." No, that's not right. "I hope this letter finds you. If you are here, in this place, it means you were strong enough. You were brave enough to choose the unknown path. I knew you would be. You have your mother's heart and your father's spirit." I had to stop and take a breath. No one had spoken of my parents to me in years. They were a closed file, a sad story to be avoided. To see them mentioned here, with love, was like a physical blow. I owe you an explanation. I owe you the truth. When your parents were taken, my world ended for a second time. The first was when I lost your grandfather. I wanted to take you in more than anything on this earth. I wanted to hold you and tell you stories and keep you safe. But I couldn't. The doctors had found a sickness in me, a shadow in my lungs. They gave me a few years at best. The state, in its infinite, heartless wisdom, declared me unfit. They said I couldn't provide a stable home, and perhaps they were right. I was fighting my own body, and I was losing. But there was another fight, too. A different kind of shadow. This land, this place, it was my secret weapon. Your grandfather and I bought it decades ago. We loved it for its starkness, its honesty. It's a place that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. After he passed, I discovered its true value. It sits on one of the most consistent wind corridors in the state. A developer, a company called Stratacorp, found out too. They want to build a massive luxury resort here. A golf course, condos, a spa, a playground for the rich, on land that has always been wild. They tried to buy me out. They offered me money, more than I'd ever seen. But I saw what they were. They were locusts. They would devour this place, sanitize it, and sell it back to people who would never understand it. I refused. So they started to play dirty. They pressured the county, filed frivolous legal challenges, tried to have my land condemned. The fight took all the money I had, and all the strength the sickness was leaving me. That is why I couldn't take you, Leo. I couldn't bring you into that battle. and I couldn't bear for you to watch me fade away. So I made a terrible choice. I let the state take you, knowing they would feed you and clothe you and keep you physically safe. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I chose your survival over my own heart, and I have prayed every day since that you would forgive me. I had to put the letter down. The air in the hut was thick, heavy. I couldn't breathe. Forgiveness? I had spent my entire childhood building a wall of resentment around the idea of the grandmother who didn't want me. It was a simple, solid narrative. I was abandoned. It was easier than thinking there was a more complicated, more painful truth. Now, that wall was crumbling. The woman I had resented was not a monster. She was a fighter, a sick, dying woman who had spent her last years fighting a corporation for a patch of dirt and fighting the state for the right to be a grandmother. And she had done it all for me. I picked up the letter again, my vision blurred. So I made a plan, a desperate, crazy plan. I used the last of my savings to pay the taxes on this land, to put the deed in your name, to make sure it would be here for you when you came of age. And I gathered the parts. Your grandfather was an engineer. He was always tinkering, always dreaming. He believed in the power of the wind. He called it the last free thing on earth. The parts in this hut are for a wind turbine, his own design. Rugged, simple, powerful. Enough to make this place a home. Enough to give you something no one can take away. Your own power. This is your inheritance, Leo. Not the land, but the choice. Stratacorp is still out there. They will come for you. They will offer you a check with many zeros. You could take it. I wouldn't blame you. It would be an easy life, a cage of gold. Or you can build. You can raise that turbine, claim this land, and live free. You can finish the fight I could not. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you. Know that in my own broken way, I was always trying to build you a home. Welcome home, my boy. I folded the letter and placed it carefully back on the stack. The silence in the Quonset hut was no longer empty. It was filled with her voice, with her story. The grief was immense, a physical weight in my chest. Grief for the years we'd lost. Grief for the woman I never got to know. But beneath the grief, something else was taking root. A fierce, burning anger. Anger at Stratacorp. Anger at the faceless system that had kept us apart. And a powerful, surging sense of purpose. She hadn't abandoned me. She had armed me. The parts against the wall weren't junk. The hut wasn't a ruin. They were the components of a future. They were a weapon, a legacy. My legacy. I stood up and walked to the big sliding door. It was rusted tight. I found a long iron bar and wedged it into the seam, putting all my weight against it. With a screech of tortured metal, the door shuddered, then slid open a few feet. Light and wind flooded the space. I stepped outside and looked at my kingdom of dirt and rust. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I would not let them take it. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. I was a city kid, raised in institutions. I knew how to mop a floor and keep my head down. I didn't know how to build, how to survive. My grandmother's legacy was a crash course. The first problem was simple: survival. My cash was almost gone. I walked the 5 miles back to Harmony and spent what was left on essentials: beans, rice, flour, a large container of water, a cheap sleeping bag, and a book of matches. The woman at the general store gave me the same pitying look as the bus driver. I ignored it. Back at the hut, I made a small, inefficient fire in a ring of stones outside. I ate cold beans from a can and slept on the concrete floor, wrapped in the thin sleeping bag. The first night was brutal. The wind howled, making the metal walls of the hut moan and pop. The cold seeped up from the concrete, chilling me to the bone. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the vast, empty night, feeling utterly and completely alone. The temptation to quit, to walk away, was a constant whisper in my ear. But every morning, I would see the footlocker and the pile of parts, and I would read another one of her letters. They weren't all grand manifestos. Most were just letters. She told me about my grandfather, about their life together. She told me stories about my mother as a little girl. She wrote about the changing seasons on the prairie, the colors of the sunset, the different voices of the wind. She was filling in the vast, empty space where my family history should have been. She was building a home for me in words, even as I struggled to build one from metal and dirt. And with every letter, my resolve hardened. This was more than just a fight against a corporation. It was a fight for my own story. I started the work. The first task was the foundation for the turbine. Her notes were precise. A concrete footing, 6 feet deep, to anchor the tower against the prairie winds. I had no tools. I had a rusty shovel I'd found in the hut and my own 2 hands. The ground was like iron, a dense, unforgiving clay. I dug for hours, my soft city hands blistering within the first hour, then breaking open. The pain was excruciating. Every shovelful was a battle. By the end of the first day, I had managed to dig a hole barely a foot deep. I collapsed onto the ground, my body screaming in protest, and wept with frustration. This was impossible. I was a fool, a boy playing at being a man. Have you ever been hit with a truth so big it just knocks the wind out of you? A moment where everything you thought you knew falls apart, or a task so daunting you feel it in your bones that it's impossible. If you've been there, if you've ever felt that crushing weight of your own limitations, let me know in the comments. You're not alone in that feeling. It's the point where you either break or you find a strength you never knew you had, a gear you never knew existed inside you. It's the moment that defines you. Let's get back to the story and see which way it went for me. I lay there on the ground, defeated, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Her words came back to me. The place where the sun sets last. I watched it sink below the horizon, a slow, majestic farewell. And in the quiet that followed, I heard her voice in my memory, reading from one of the letters. Your grandfather always said the land teaches you. It teaches you patience because it moves on its own time. It teaches you humility because it is more powerful than you. And it teaches you strength because it endures. I got up. My hands were raw. My back was a knot of fire. I picked up the shovel. I dug for another hour in the twilight, fueled by nothing but anger and a desperate, stubborn refusal to fail her. The next morning, I walked back to Harmony. Not to quit, but to re-equip. At the general store, I asked the woman if there was any work. She looked me up and down, at my blistered hands and dirty clothes. I need someone to unload a truck tomorrow morning, and the diner always needs a dishwasher. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I walked to town, my body aching, and worked. I unloaded trucks, washed dishes, swept floors. I earned enough money to buy food, and more importantly, tools. A real pickaxe, a heavy-duty post-hole digger, a bag of concrete mix, gloves. Every evening, I would walk the 5 miles back to the hut and work on the foundation, digging into that stubborn earth by moonlight. I was running on fumes, fueled by caffeine, cheap food, and sheer will. One afternoon, as I was digging, a rusty old tractor rumbled up the road and stopped. An old man with a face like a weathered map and startlingly blue eyes watched me from the driver's seat. He didn't say anything for a long time, just watched me swing the pickaxe. Finally, he shut off the engine and climbed down. "That Clay's a devil," he said, his voice a low gravel. I nodded, too tired to speak. "You're Alara's boy," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Silas." I straightened up, leaning on the pickaxe. "Leo." "Knew your grandmother," he said, kicking at a clump of dirt. "Stubborn woman. Good woman. She told me you might come one day." He looked at the hole, then at the pile of parts inside the hut. "Building the windmill, are you?" I nodded again. "She left instructions." He grunted. He walked over to his tractor and came back with a thermos. He poured a cup of steaming coffee and handed it to me. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. "You're doing it the hard way," he said. "That tower's heavy. You'll never get it up on your own." He looked me right in the eye. "I've got a block and tackle in my barn, and my tractor's got a winch. When you're ready to raise it, you come find me. My place is 2 miles down that way." He pointed west. "Don't be a fool and try it alone." He didn't wait for an answer. He just climbed back on his tractor, started it up, and rumbled away. I stood there, holding the warm cup, and watched him go. It was the first act of unconditional kindness I had received from a stranger in my entire life. It was a crack of light in my dark, solitary world. It gave me the strength to keep going. The foundation was the hardest part. Once the concrete was set, the rest of the work felt possible. I followed my grandmother's schematics, which were more like a conversation than a blueprint. Her notes were scrawled in the margins. "Be careful with this part, it's heavier than it looks. Your grandfather would be so proud." I assembled the tower on the ground, bolt by painstaking bolt. I mounted the generator housing. I wired the control box. Each small success was a victory, a testament to her faith in me. Finally, the day came. The tower was assembled, lying on the ground like a fallen giant. The blades were ready. It was time to raise it. I walked the 2 miles to Silas's farm. He was in his barn, mending a piece of equipment. I stood at the door, feeling like a beggar. "It's time," I said. He just wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "Knew it would be." He didn't ask questions. He didn't want payment. He just hitched a trailer with the block and tackle to his tractor and followed me back. The work of raising the tower was a slow, careful ballet of ropes, pulleys, and engine power. Silas directed me with quiet, efficient commands. He was a man of few words, but immense knowledge. He knew the physics of leverage and tension in his bones. As the tower rose, foot by foot, my heart hammered in my chest. This was the moment, the culmination of all the pain, the sweat, the lonely nights. With a final groan from the winch, the tower settled onto its bolts on the concrete footing. It was vertical. It was standing. It pointed at the sky, a thin, defiant spear of metal against the vast prairie. Silas helped me tighten the bolts, his gnarled hands working with a surprising dexterity. Then we mounted the blades. They were sleek and beautiful, like the wings of a futuristic bird. The work was done. We stood back, side by side, and looked up at it. The turbine, motionless in the still air. "Now we wait," Silas said. We waited. The air was unnaturally calm. My stomach was in knots. What if it didn't work? What if all this was for nothing? What if I had failed? Silas seemed to read my mind. "She'll blow," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "Always does." And then I felt it, a cool whisper on my cheek, a ripple through the tall grass. The wind was coming. The blades twitched. Then they began to turn, slowly, almost lazily. They caught the rising wind, and their rotation smoothed out, picking up speed. Faster and faster they spun, until they were a silver blur against the sky. A low, powerful hum filled the air, the sound of creation. I ran inside the hut, to the small control panel I had wired. I flipped a switch. A single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered once, twice, then glowed with a steady, brilliant light. Light. Power. My power. I walked back outside and looked at Silas. I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face. He just clapped me once on the shoulder, a solid, grounding weight. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said. Then he got on his tractor and drove away, leaving me alone with the sound of the wind and the light. The months that followed were a transformation. The Quonset hut, once a derelict shell, slowly became a home. With the power from the turbine, I had light and heat. I ran a wire to a small hot plate, and for the first time, I cooked a real meal. The taste of hot food, earned by my own labor, was a revelation. I used the money from my odd jobs in town to buy insulation, lumber, and drywall. I spent my evenings framing out walls, creating a small bedroom and a living area within the vast space. I learned carpentry from books I borrowed from the town library and from trial and error. Mostly error. But every crooked wall, every uneven joint was mine. I was building my life, one 2x4 at a time. I found a new rhythm, a life dictated by the sun and the wind. I started a small garden in a patch of earth Silas helped me till, growing potatoes, carrots, and hardy greens. I learned to read the sky, to feel the weather changing in my bones. The land was no longer an enemy. It was my partner. I finished reading my grandmother's letters, savoring them one by one. I learned about my family, my roots. I was not a disconnected fragment. I was the latest chapter in a long story. The anger I had felt began to soften, replaced by a deep, quiet gratitude. The loneliness was still there, a familiar ache. But it was different now. It was the solitude of a homesteader, not the isolation of an outcast. One day, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize drove up the road and stopped. A man in an expensive suit got out, his city shoes crunching on the gravel. He looked at the hut, at the spinning turbine, and at me with a look of mild distaste. "Leo Vance?" he asked, his voice smooth and polished. I nodded. "My name is Mr. Davies. I'm with Stratacorp." He smiled, a flash of white teeth that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to make you a very wealthy young man." He opened a briefcase and pulled out a contract. The number at the top had so many zeros I couldn't quite process it. It was more money than I could imagine. It was a ticket out, a new life, anywhere I wanted. 2 years ago, I would have signed it without a second thought. I would have taken the money and run, and never looked back. But I wasn't that person anymore. I looked at the contract, then at my home. I looked at the garden where my food was growing, at the tower that hummed with the power of the wind. I looked at my hands, which were no longer soft and smooth, but calloused and capable. "No, thank you," I said. His smile faltered. "I don't think you understand, son. This is life-changing money." "I know," I said. But I already have a life, and it's not for sale. I turned and walked back into my hut, leaving him standing there in the wind. I heard his car door slam and the sound of the engine fading into the distance. I had won. Her fight was over. My fight had just begun. I stood at the door of my home, the Quonset hut that was no longer a rusty shell, but a sanctuary. The wind was blowing steady, and the turbine hummed its quiet song of power. It was the sound of my freedom. The sun was setting, and the sky was a masterpiece of color. The place where the sun sets last. I finally understood. It wasn't just a location. It was a state of being. A place where you could stand at the end of the day, look at what you'd built, and know it was real. Know it was yours. My grandmother had given me more than land or a machine. She had given me a second chance. She had reached across time and death to teach me that a home isn't something you are given. It's something you build. That power isn't something you are granted. It's something you create. She had taught me that the most valuable things, love, resilience, self-worth, can't be bought or sold. They have to be earned. My inheritance wasn't wind and iron. It was the strength to harness them. I was no longer Leo, the ward of the state. I was Leo Vance, the boy who built a home out of rust and wind. The boy who finished his grandmother's fight. My past was no longer a weight that held me down. It was the foundation on which I had built my future. The scars were still there, but now they were part of a story of survival, not of abandonment. What the world sees as worthless, a forgotten kid, a patch of barren land, a rusty metal shed, can become the foundation of everything. You just have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to face the wind and not be broken by it. You have to be willing to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. And you have to believe that you are worth fighting for. If this story meant something to you, if it sparked something in you, please subscribe and join our community. This is a place for stories about finding our way when we're lost, about building something out of nothing. And in the comments below, I want you to tell me one thing you've built that you're proud of. It doesn't have to be a house or a machine. It can be a relationship, a skill, a new life for yourself, a moment of forgiveness. Something you had to work for, something that made you who you are. I'll be reading every single one, because we all deserve a place to call our own. And sometimes, we have to be the ones to build it. Thank you for listening.